Welcome back to Normal Island. It's been a while. I do apologise. We've had a pretty damn busy week. And of course, coming up to Christmas, you know what it's like. But I'm happy to be back with our brilliant viewers. And tonight I'm joined by our excellent Turn Left contributor, Lewis Aaron. How are you doing tonight?
Hello. Yeah, I'm good. Highly caffeinated, ready to go. Bit sleep deprived, but we're gonna have one hell of a show, I'm sure.
It's a jam-packed show, but tell me, did you not get a good night's sleep last night?
Oh, you know how it is sometimes. Do you know what it
Yeah.
is? It's doom scrolling. It really, really
Mm.
is. Because when you've got ADHD and you're like hyper focused on something, 4 hours can just go by, and the next thing you know, it's 4 a.m. And you haven't got enough
Mm.
sleep.
I wonder if there's
So
something in the air, though, because I couldn't sleep till probably about 3 o'clock, and it's not like
you know
me.
what? I'm sure it's all the amazing news that's out there. Like everything's fine.
Yeah.
There's no bad news out there at all. The world is fine. We're heading towards world peace and full blown socialism. Don't worry. I'm sure
If only.
we'll get a good night's sleep soon.
If only. Now, as always, make sure you like the stream, leave a comment to boost the algorithm, because it's what it demands, it's what we need. Now, coming up on tonight's show, Labour have ditched their 5 missions with another Starmer reboot. Reform overtake Labour in a poll. Amnesty have finally declared that Israel is committing a genocide, and a healthcare CEO was killed in broad daylight. We have got a packed out show today, but let's get on with it. The Labour Party has rebooted once again by ditching their 5 missions and have announced their 6 milestones in a speech at Pinewood Studios last night. Keir Starmer laid out 6 major policy areas for the next 5 years. They are higher living standards. Starmer pledged higher living standards in every region of the country so working people have more money in their pockets. The burden of the cost of living crisis no longer intruding on the joy of family life. Building 1.5 million homes in England. Starmer pledged to fast-track planning decisions on at least 150 major economic infrastructure projects, saying, clearly, if we don't turbocharge house building with reform, we won't meet that milestone. 92% of patients in England waiting no longer than 18 weeks for elective treatment. Starmer said the NHS, perhaps more than any other institution, represents the bigger us. And yet here we are. The NHS, even the NHS, losing the trust of the British public. Broken, but not beyond repair. Putting police back on the beat with a named officer for every community and 13,000 additional officers, PCSOs and special constables. Starmer promised more police on the beat and stamped out antisocial behaviour in every community because he said nobody should feel insecure on the streets they call home. Getting a record 75% of 5-year-olds in England ready to learn when they start school. Starmer said 1 in 3 children are not ready for school at the age of 5. He said there were pupils in reception who aren't starting to read, they're struggling to speak. Labour's aim is to get an additional 40,000 to 45,000 children a year hitting developmental goals. Energy security, protecting bill payers, and climate security. In a speech, the Prime Minister promised clean power by 2030, homegrown British energy, making our country more secure. So never again can a tyrant like Putin attack the living standards of working people. That was a hell of a paragraph. There was a lot there. Now, after the speech, Starmer held a Q&A with the media, and we've got a couple of clips. First up was a question about immigration.
Chris Mason at BBC News. You've set out these milestones this morning. Immigration isn't one of them, but you have talked about it and it is in the document. And so people might wonder whether it's a priority or not. Thank you.
There are basics in government. One of them is security and security of our borders. And they're foundational. And they must be delivered.
Listen at BBC News. You've set out these milestones this morning.
Has that been cut off then? I'm not sure what happened there. Can we rerun that video again, please?
Chris Mason at BBC News. You've set out these milestones this morning. Immigration isn't one of them, but you have talked about it and it is in the document. And so people might wonder whether it's a priority or not. Thank you.
There are basics in government. One of them is security and security of our borders. And they're foundational. And they must be delivered. So immigration and control of immigration must be delivered. That is a foundational principle that any government must do. The missions then sit on top of that. They're the change that the government will then bring about. And so these are absolutely integral to our plan. They're the foundational stone of the plan, and they will be delivered. We'll bring in immigration down, both legal and illegal. But I take that as the basic security that any government must deliver, and we build the 5 missions, the plan for change on that. Thank you, Chris.
I mean, did that answer mean anything to you? I mean, you know what? Starmer really embodies the trying to reach a word count on an essay. I mean, he just throws any old crap out. But I think he's uniquely bad. I mean, it's what politicians do, right? But he is so bad at communication and talking to people. Now, you would have noticed that the entire media wanted to speak about immigration and why it wasn't in the 6 milestones. Of course, that's because they are obsessed with the issue. And look, it's important to people in this country, of course, but there's such a desperate push by the media and the right-wing politicians to make this everyone's #1 priority. Having said that, he could have given a straightforward answer, which was, okay, immigration is important, but guess what? Most people care about their material well-being. That's why the milestones are framed around cost of living, housing, energy, education. It's such an easy answer, but he can't do that. Now, the next question is from Robert Peston about the cost of living.
In a parliament in modern times when real household disposable income didn't rise. I mean, it rose the lowest on record in the last parliament, and it's currently forecast by the Office for Budget second lowest on record in this parliament, largely because you put up employers' national insurance. So what is your target for increasing real household disposable income, living standards? Because unless you put a numerical target on it, it's a meaningless milestone.
One of the worst failures of the last government was that living standards went down. People were actually worse off at the end of the government than they were at the beginning of the government. That's unforgivable. And that's what we want to turn around, to make sure people feel they're better off. There's one thing that came across in the election. Ask people the questions on the doorsteps up and down the country, do you feel better off? There was only one answer given to that question, which was no. And that's what we intend to turn around. Stabilising the economy was an essential first step, because until you stabilise the economy, you can't build anything. On that, we then drive at living standards and drive them up. And people know when they're better off. It's one of the first things that people talk about. Of course, we'll go on. That's what the milestones are here. They all ladder up to our plan to make sure that living standards go up. But this is, I think, one of the most important people. Do people feel that they're better off? Do they feel safe? Do they feel they've got an NHS that's working for them? These are the fundamentals that I think everybody is most concerned about.
Sorry, I was falling asleep then. He does that to you. Now, our last clip, I thought it was interesting because Starmer is asked about all his other pledges he made before and if they're being ditched. And it seems the journalist was just as confused as the rest of us.
The ones which are slightly puzzling. On the NHS pledge milestone, sorry. What happens to all the other ones that you backed on the NHS in the general election, like, for instance, 4-hour waiting times for A&E? And can I also ask you, make a point in this document of talking about the 1.5 million homes in England?
Gary, it's one question.
Well, it's a long document. We've come a long way.
Yeah, but I mean, we're never going to... a lot of people to get through.
You change your language here on housing and you say it's hugely ambitious. Is that because you actually think the 1.5 million is a bit of a moonshot and you're not going to get there and you're preparing the ground for that?
Well, Gary, let me take all 3 parts of your question. Firstly, on living standards, look, nobody feels they're better off under the last government. And we just tested that on the 4th of July across the entire country. One of the main conversations on every doorstep was people saying they didn't feel better off. In fact, they felt worse off. That's what we are intending to change, and that's why we've made it one of the priorities under the plan. On the second point you make about the NHS, because I do not accept the proposition that because you drive to deal with waiting lists, then everything else must suffer. That is part of the thinking of the last 14 years. It's part of the reason you have managed decline, because you accept that and you accept other standards can go down. I don't accept that. And that's why we're going to drive this hard on delivery. That's why we're going to drive through reform at the same time. But the very idea that the moment you say I'm prioritising one thing, that is permission to let go everything else is completely wrong. It's part of the wrong thinking that we've had for years in politics, and I don't accept it for 1 minute, and it is not built into our assumptions.
I mean, I was expecting our numbers to go down. I apologise. I should have probably edited that better, because he's so dull. He really is bad in the media, and I've been saying this for years, but I keep being reminded of how bad he is when he when we watch his speeches. Lewis, now we're going to speak about his performance or rhetoric in a second, but I want to ask about the 6 policies specifically. What do you make of them?
I'm annoyed at the media because, right, I get it. Immigration, I think it's an important topic. People care about it. But the fact that, I watched it live, Chris Mason's first question, just straight into immigration, when let's focus on these 6 pledges. I obviously understand why Labour or Keir Starmer might be annoyed at that, because there are so many more problems than talking about immigration, right? And this is almost part of like the big distraction. The NHS is crumbling. People's rents are going up. We don't have enough houses. Policing is an issue. So I actually understand why Labour's focusing on these issues, but the media are so obsessed with immigration that they're adding to this situation where it's what everybody constantly wants to focus on, and it's a distraction from the actual issues that we have. Because again, even though I accept that people are worried about immigration, and that's a fine conversation to have, the priority shouldn't be immigration. The priority should actually be the things that he is talking about. And so the media are obsessed with that. In terms of the pledges, I'm not going to, dismiss them for actually aiming big. I think these are some big aims, and, I hope that they achieve them. I hope they do good for the country. But I think they're still shooting themselves in the foot. But who knows? Maybe in 4.5 years' time, we could be proven wrong. They could have built 1.5 million houses, and people could have, the NHS waiting times could be down. But these are very big aims to have after 14 years of Tory rule and austerity. And there's almost a part of me that wants them to achieve this, but at the same time, they're setting themselves up to fail. And therefore, setting themselves up for somebody like Reform or the Conservatives to come into power, because they're setting the goal so high. And on top of that as well, they've already been in Parliament for 6 months now. Is it 6 months, 5 months? Sorry, whatever it is. And there's still loads of legislation that they could have been putting through by now. I understand there's been some gaps in between there. I understand that, they've had their conference season. But if they really wanted to achieve these goals, there should be so much more legislation that's getting pushed through Parliament right now. And it's not. On top of that as well, in terms of the goals that they're trying to achieve, when it comes to housing, they're massively relying just on the private sector instead of doing both. I accept that we have to use the private sector to achieve these goals, but at the same time, we should be doing both. We should be building council housing. We should be utilising this as much as we can, and we should be funding councils to build. We should be doing so many more things that we're not already doing. It's 5 or 6 months in. Where's the legislation? Where's the action? I'm not expecting houses to be built already, okay? But they don't seem to have taken that many steps to, undo the bureaucratic state like they're promising. I understand they need to, get off their feet. They're still finding their way around. That is fine. But I'm still not seeing any action. They've got 4.5 years. Where's the legislation? When it comes to the NHS, it's the same problem. They're relying too much on the private sector instead of investing in new doctors. They could be expanding the limit on how many doctors are getting trained per year. Right now, I think it's about 9,500. They're not doing that. There's been no conversation about increasing the limit on how many doctors can be trained per year. They could have been, legislating for funding for nurses, for more social care workers. They could have increased the wages even further within social care, but they've increased it marginally. I don't see how any of the actions that they've taken in the last few months are going to lead to any of these successes. And again, yes, they've been in Parliament for a few months, but so many actions should have been taken by now.
I mean, yeah, when you look at the specific policies, you're right, they're not bad. I mean, the pledge to build 1.5 million new homes, that was actually more than what Jeremy Corbyn offered in 2017. Obviously, a pledge and delivering on those promises are two very separate things. But here's the issue they find themselves in, which is it doesn't matter if they announce good policies because they've lost the goodwill and trust. I mean, arguably, they never had it to begin with, but they've made it worse. And that's because Labour, and Starmer specifically, are just bad at politics. He can't sell them. He has no narrative, and people aren't going to pay attention to what he's actually offering because they are angry. I mean, we're all angry. And look, I've kind of pivoted towards vibes here, haven't I? And I kind of want to ask you about that because, I mean, we can discuss the policies back and forth, but again, because Starmer's lost that goodwill, people aren't going to listen to that, are they?
No, like, I actually don't disagree with the vibes approach. I think they do need better vibes, right?
Exactly, 100%, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And, when Keir Starmer started answering the question about, was it Robert Peston's question, which is like, how are you going to measure this? And I actually agree with the response of people can just see how they feel. But again, he's so bad at answering questions. If he would have just turned around and said, people who are watching this, they don't care about the growth of the G7 compared to other countries. They don't care about all these numbers that we float around in the press, that we talk about in these briefings. What they care about is if they feel better. So if they feel better in 5 years, they will vote us in. That would be a really great, sharp response that would probably, go viral. It would probably get more attention. But no, he goes down this like technocratic, bureaucratic, boring answer when he was literally set up for the perfect response there. But again, he fails. There are all these apparent masterminds that are like behind him. Morgan McSweeney is put up in the press as this mastermind behind elections and all of this. Like, if I was Morgan McSweeney, I'd be getting Keir Starmer in lessons right now. We'd be doing practice every day. We'd be bringing in the best speechwriters. How is it that he's still answering questions the same way as he did 4 or 5 years ago? It doesn't make any sense. Are they setting him up to fail? I don't know. Do they want somebody better in? Was he just the key to getting into power to eventually replace him? To get somebody more charismatic and enthusiastic in? I don't know, because his performance does not seem to be improving. Again, I agree with going towards more of the vibes, talking about how people feel rather than floating numbers around. But again, he failed to land. He failed to land a perfect setup.
And in 2020, you had Starmer and his 10 pledges. He dropped them all. Then he had his 5 missions. Now, just 5 months into government, he's doing another reboot. I was going to ask you, they seem to have no idea what they're doing, but you've answered that question, and you brought up Morgan McSweeney. The reason why Morgan McSweeney isn't improving Keir Starmer in terms of rhetoric and message is because these guys aren't actually good at that. What they're good at is ruthlessly destroying the left inside the party. Specifically, Morgan McSweeney, he works behind the shadows. Not a public-facing guy. Obviously, I've not actually seen the guy talk. I've seen pics of him. He kind of looks like a dweeb. He probably is a dweeb. So I doubt he knows many people are really bolsterous. Say it again.
A powerful dweeb.
A powerful dweeb. So I don't know if they know about character or they know any good characters in the media, but that's not really their intention. It doesn't matter if Keir Starmer fails because Morgan's already put the foundations of setting up the Labour Party going in further to the right, which is key here. And I think, it's so easy to be populist, even if you're not naturally a populist, because obviously Keir Starmer is incredibly technocratic, but it's very easy to say, look, people don't care about these figures, right? People hear the term growth all of the time. All they care about is whether they can pay their rent and their mortgage. It's very, very simple. And he could just use that line, but I don't know why he doesn't do it. He's maybe so wedded to being a technocrat. I don't know. But all he's doing is further entrenching people's anger towards the establishment. I mean, he is very much the establishment, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And more people are going to go to reform because of it.
Yeah, definitely. And, again, they've only been in power for a few months. Like, it's fine. And I will keep saying that because I think it's fair to say that. And we can only really start measuring their performance 1 or 2 years in terms of these goals and seeing what's getting, kicked off and what's getting started. I did recently hear about Angela Rayner approving some plans that Michael Gove blocked. But at the same time, because I love bringing this person up, just the other day, there is a solar farm that's trying to be built in this town in northeast Durham called in Burnhope. And all the NIMBYs are coming together to try and get it torn down, and it would give the energy to about 15 to 20,000 homes. But guess what? The NIMBYs don't want it, and they're ganging up and they're organising to try and get rid of it because they think it'll be a bit of an eyesore. And guess what? Labour MP Luke Akehurst is supporting them and even wrote a letter to the government. So Labour's own MPs, again, are actually going against everything that Keir's starting. He mentioned NIMBYs specifically in his speech at one point, saying, we're coming after you.
Very surprising from Luke Akehurst being a NIMBY. He loves building, but particularly likes building weapons to blow cities up.
Settlements as well.
Nukem and settlements. That's surprising, actually. But do you know what? It's another thing where we can hate Luke Akehurst on. And that's one of my favourite pastimes. But we do have to move on because we've got a lot to cover. So let's go on to our next story. So a recent poll has come out which puts Reform ahead of the Labour Party, with the Tories on top. As you can see on your screen, the Tories are first with 26%, followed by Reform with 24%, and narrowly behind is Labour on 23%. We also have a breakdown of the numbers. In this poll, you can see that Labour are roughly even when it comes to gender, and Reform have the widest gap, with 22% of men saying they would vote Reform compared to 12% of women. Notice the don't knows, however. 41% of women are not decided, which seems like the biggest indicator here. Now, of course, this is just one poll. Does that mean Reform is actually ahead? I don't think so. However, polls have consistently shown that the Tories are ahead of Labour. Lewis, what are your thoughts about this poll? I mean, will we see a Reform government, not this election, but maybe the next?
I love that you used the screenshot that I sent you of the data. You can see what chat. That was the same screenshot that I sent you of the data. Yeah.
Oh, yes, it is. Yeah. Thank you, Lewis.
What's interesting about the data, obviously, is the gender split as well. It was twice as many yeses for Reform for men versus women, which I think is interesting. There was a few tabs on that sheet, actually. One of the questions was, if there was a general election tomorrow, who would you vote for? And that's the data that is on screen. But there was another tab, which was like, if you were forced to vote, who would you vote for? And that's, I think it was a 33% that you just said don't know. It goes up to something like 68%. If people had a gun to their head, who would you vote for right now? Almost 70% of people said they don't know. And again, going back to the previous point about Labour, they've only been in power for a few months, but the fact that they can't take advantage of 14 years of Tory rule and come in and at least look somewhat competent is a bit scary for the next few years, because Reform are organising. I hate to use these words because it sounds like I'm praising them, but they're doing a good job in terms of building up their base. They are organising on the ground. They are at community centres. They're going to events. They're getting a lot of time in the press, too much time in the press, actually, because, again, they're favoured, especially Nigel Farage. He gets too many appearances. And on top of that as well, if you actually look into the Parliament website, you can actually see what types of questions they're submitting to the government, because they have the right to do that and the right to request information. People like Rupert Lowe, Richard Tice, they are gathering a lot of information from the government. I think Rupert Lowe, bearing in mind he's only been in Parliament a few months, has already asked over 100 questions to the government, and it's all focused around migration and data. It's all focused around asking questions about migration linked to criminality. They're asking all these very specific questions because they're building a case. And again, they're going to continue winning with this. Nigel Farage has got GB News, which has just taken over Sky News in terms of viewership. And on YouTube as well. I looked at the data the other day when this report came out. They're beating Sky News by double the amount of average viewers on YouTube as well, which is obviously the most most popular platform in terms of video watching online. You've got Nigel Farage spitting out lies like he did the other day on GB News, saying that only 1/5 of people coming to this country are actually working. But he's kind of telling the truth but lying at the same time, because he's using the word working, because obviously he's not talking about the 450,000 students, which immediately brings it up to a majority of people in this country who come here are actually doing something. But he's using, those twisted words that, populists and fascists use. But at the end of the day, they are making gains. I don't think if there was an election tomorrow, they would actually win.
No.
It's just, that anti-establishment vote that people will do on polls. And again, it was just a few thousand people. But this is early days. They only just officially started getting organised a couple of months before the election, barely even that, and they've already made some good gains. And we've got the prospect of Elon Musk, which I don't necessarily think was a real story, but I think he is going to be involved in some way in the future in our elections. And it's very scary what's going to happen over the next few years. It truly is.
I mean, I think it's worth pointing out that from all the talk by Reform for our GDC, they're trying to say how popular they are, but that's not true. The reality is no political party is popular. I mean, they're all equally polling in the 20s. So they're all so divisive. This isn't an endorsement as such, but rather due to the party splitting. And this really shows that first past the post is finished, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Obviously, we had just the other day the vote in Parliament on proportional representation, which again was a non-binding bill, and it won by 2 votes. And weirdly, Nigel Farage wasn't there for the vote, which is funny because he's missed there's been about 50 to 60 votes in Parliament since we've started that he could have been a part of, and he's only been there for about 20 of them. And also another member of his party, was it Rupert Lowe, I think, who voted against PR as well.
That's really astonishing, isn't it? Like that's voting against your interest.
Yeah,
it's funny, but
he is a mastermind of the media, though, because ahead of missing a vote about a week and a half ago, I think it was on the smoking ban vote. I can't remember which one it was, and he already put out a tweet, and I think he said it on his show as well. He's like, "Oh, I'm going to get shit for not being at this vote, but I know it's going to pass." And then immediately after people call him out for not being there for the vote, all of his supporters are all over social media, they're all over TikTok saying, "Well, he knew it was going to pass." Like they just eat up anything that he says. But yeah, it's incredibly frustrating. But at the end of the day, they are making gains. I wouldn't say they're popular, but they're making gains. They get a disproportionate amount of media attention compared to someone like, the Green Party, who's only got 1 less seat than them. And they are doing a measurably good job in terms of what they want to achieve, and they've still got another 4.5 years to achieve it.
Well, that's why our political system's so broken, because before 2017, you had a multi-party system. Okay, obviously the smaller parties couldn't be in government, but you had the Lib Dems and other smaller parties gaining ground. And then there was sort of like the great sort of push back to the main parties in 2017. Labour got 40%, the Tories got 41, 42. And for a time being, it was back to like the traditional way of just Labour and the Tories. And now it's gone again, because once again, no political party is popular. No one likes them. It's going to be winning by default. That's essentially what it is. I do want to talk more about this, but
can I make one more very quick point?
You can make one more point before we move on.
With the first past the post system as well, Labour just got in on 33.6%, and some people won their seat with as little as 30%. It's very possible Reform could come in with an even lower majority than Keir Starmer got in terms of the vote share, and still win just enough seats to get a majority in Parliament. Because people talk about this idea of like, first past the post is great because it keeps out the fringes, but it's actually also a high risk system as well, that if the fringe just moves just above that level of fringe and gets just enough votes and splits it across multiple constituencies, they can come in with a tiny majority.
Yep. I mean, Reform are quite successful, I would say, under first past the post. So the argument that it keeps out fringes no longer holds water.
Yeah.
But we are going to move on to our next story. Actually, tell you what, before we do that, if you want to see Turn Left continue to grow, then make sure you share this video online. Tell your friends and family about us. And if you haven't subscribed, make sure that you do. Hit the notification bell, because a lot of people are saying to me, I'm subscribed, but I don't know when you go live or when a video drops. So hit that sub bell. Now, there are currently many of us working voluntarily, and we want to be in a position where we are paid for our work. And one day, this will become our full-time jobs. This means we can upgrade our equipment, create more ambitious content, and one day have a studio. That'll be fabulous. Let's build a socialist media alternative. You can head over to turnleftmedia.co.uk/support to donate. And you can also follow us on Blue Sky. Our handle is simply @turnleftmedia.co.uk. Before we go to our third story, I want to see if we've got any interesting comments in the chat. We can bring them up. Edward Sex, good to see you. Curtis's interview with Owen Jones was great on the subject of the nature of the Labour right. Yeah, so the reason why this has come up is because the last show was cancelled, so we did a rerun of it. It was a really good interview and it had to be cut down quite significantly because Owen Jones likes to talk. It's not a criticism, by the way. It was a lot of fun. But when you get him going on the Labour right, it's hard to stop. He's like, they are bastards. They're monsters, soulless people. And I'm trying to be professional doing an interview, but I'm there going, yeah, you're absolutely right. He knows the Labour right very well. He's mingled with these people. He knows them. He knows how some of these people are the worst kind of people in politics. Let's go to another. Phil Nelson, TikTok to the young men leading to lots of contentious opinions of right leading, though they would disagree and say it's mainstream. Yep, TikTok, all algorithms essentially push right-wing content. You get it on YouTube, you get it everywhere. That's why the right seems to dominate all forms of social media. But yeah, TikTok has been a great source for a lot of people learning about Palestine, but unfortunately there's been a great source for right-wing propaganda, and it is reaching young men. Any more comments? Jay, the deliberate government policy of raising unemployment to reduce inflation will violently hurt black people, non-black people, women and disabled people. Yep, it's the same that and with austerity. They disproportionately hit minority communities. When it comes to austerity, it's largely women. It kind of reminds me of the US administration. Was it Nixon? And his drug policy was designed to deliberately disenfranchise people of colour. So policies can be leveraged against communities. Not saying that everyone in government is doing it deliberately, but it almost doesn't matter when the outcome is the same. Scottish Soul, our current Labour feels like America's Biden administration. I'd actually say that Biden is to the left of Labour because some of the policies in terms of domestic ones, Labour policies, were quite radical. For the Democratic Party, that is, and had some of the strongest workers' rights since FDR. I mean, Labour wouldn't touch that. I mean, they've already watered down some pretty weak workers' rights bill under Angela Rayner. So I actually would say in some areas they're actually more progressive than Labour. But I agree, there's going to be a great sort of push to have our political system become exactly like the US, where the Labour Party is like the Democrats, and I would say reform of essentially the Republican Party. I think that is all our comments. Thank you for them. Keep them coming in, though, because we still will be reading them even if they don't appear on our live show. Now, on to our next story. Brian Thompson, the CEO of United Healthcare, was shot dead Wednesday morning in Manhattan, with the suspect still at large. Police revealed an image of the suspect in which they believe the person was staying at an Upper West Side hostel in the city. Now, no official motive has been given, but we kind of all know why, don't we? Conjecture about the motive for the killing was heightened by words scrawled on shell casings in magic marker: deny, depose, and defend. Those words refer to healthcare companies denying healthcare to people, then defending their actions. Now, it seems that most people are in agreement about what transpired, which is that the healthcare system itself, a profit-making machine where people die due to the fact that they can't afford sometimes life-saving care, is a huge issue. There also seems to be very little sympathy for the CEO. And guess what? You can include myself in that too. If you're going to ask me to feel sympathy for someone who directly killed hundreds of thousands by denying healthcare, you'll be waiting a long time. Now, this is a different position to actively supporting vigilantism, right? Which a lot of people online, including liberals, are deliberately trying to conflate. Now, some may say, well, the issue is the system rather than individuals, which is true. The American healthcare system is built to shut out poor and working class people so they die. However, the decisions within the confines of this inhumane system still makes a difference. Specifically with United Healthcare, they deny more people than any other insurer. Not only that, but United Healthcare also used AI to deny people's claims. Just over a year before United Healthcare CEO Brian Thompson was murdered this week in Midtown Manhattan, a lawsuit filed against the insurance giant he helmed revealed just how draconian his claims denying process had become. Last November, the estates of two former UHC patients filed suit in Minnesota alleging that the insurer used an AI algorithm to deny and override claims to elderly patients that had been approved by their doctors. The algorithm in question, known as NH Predicts, allegedly had a 90% error rate, and according to the families of the two deceased men who filed the suit, the UHC knew about it. They are truly monsters, and if the US had universal healthcare, this shooting wouldn't have happened. Now, many in our country are glad that we don't have this system for now. However, what many people don't know is that United Healthcare is involved in our NHS. This is an article from the Mirror in 2020. US private healthcare firm handed £7 million of NHS contract to rank patients exclusive. Donald Trump once praised a $184 billion global giant United Health Group, which divides NHS patients into high, medium and low risk groups, sparking fears people could be turned down for ops because of age or weight. They are coming for our NHS. Now, it seems that healthcare CEOs are spooked. Anthem Blue Cross Blue Shield recently announced that they were no longer going to use anesthesia for the entire length of some surgeries. Blue Cross Blue Shield in Connecticut, New York and Missouri had declared it would no longer pay for anesthesia for the full length of some surgeries. If the procedure goes over a certain time, anesthesia will not be covered for the duration. Now, since the shooting, the company has now reversed that policy, and they said this in a statement. Anthem Blue Cross Blue Shield said in a statement that its decision to backpedal resulted from significant widespread misinformation about the policy. To be clear, it never was and never will be about the policy of Anthem Blue Cross Blue Shield to not pay for medically necessary anaesthesia services, the statement said. The proposed update to the policy was only designed to clarify the appropriateness of anaesthesia consistent with well-established clinical guidelines, which is jargon for our policy is absolutely repulsive and we thought we'd get away with it, but now we're scared. Many companies have now hidden their CEOs off their websites. Lewis, I want to ask you about this. I mean, what do you make of people's responses? I mean, should we all be bleeding our hearts out over this man who has made decisions that have directly led to the deaths of potentially thousands?
Yeah, I saw a clip from...
Yeah, can you turn yourself up a bit? Sorry.
Apparently I'm a bit quiet.
You're still very quiet.
Hello?
There we go.
I muted my microphone while I was typing. Anyway, I saw a clip on CNN earlier today, which was like CNN saying, "Oh God, the social media comments after we posted this story are awful," and they started showing all of these comments of just literally tens of thousands of people with hundreds of thousands of likes of people just telling stories about when they were denied certain claims from either United Health or various other insurance companies. And, they were trying to almost like give sympathy towards this. And I get, they can't be on TV and be like, oh, it's good that this has happened. And I would never say that either. I don't either condone or advocate for violence, but I have absolutely no sympathy for this man or anyone in his position. The response to social media to me has been interesting, to say the least. People are becoming more socially conscious, more class conscious of the situation that they're in, as these companies absolutely, it's beyond profit gouging. It's inhumane, the American health system. People getting denied for claims, as you said, based on AI. The company who very well may have won in 2016 if he didn't get screwed over by the Democratic Party, who actually had a lot of people who then voted for Trump on his side, right? He was a person who brought people together. And by now, if Bernie would have got into power, who knows how many amazing things would have happened to US healthcare if he did. But now it's getting to the point where the US healthcare system is beyond anything that anybody could have ever imagined. We've got the highest leading cause of debt, bankruptcy in America is health-related debt. We have people, getting hit by a car and they have to pay, $20,000 for an ambulance. It's absolutely insane. The amount of stories that I've seen over the years of people, taking their own life, families being split up over debt and the stress that it causes. It's insurmountable. But the response for me, people making it into memes, expected. People making jokes online, expected. The amount of videos that I've seen, I know you don't spend too much time on TikTok. I don't know if they're coming up on your Instagram feed, but there's a joke going on right now, which is if you see him, don't say anything. We didn't see him. We don't know what it looks like. I ain't snitching. And I know people, it's very tongue in cheek, but a lot of it isn't. Like, people are actually happy about this because this guy, for me, is on the same level as a person who sells arms, like that same immoral level to me. And I get it, and I really, really get the response to this, and I have again zero sympathy.
And these people are not evil, which some pundits are trying to make it out, and it really pisses me off when they say that. Or you can disagree, but you don't have to support violence. Again, you're kind of conflating the two, like saying I really don't care that this, quite frankly, bastard has died, to I think you should go out and do it. That's a different position, right? But you just got to think all those people who've lost their lives to healthcare. Medical bankruptcy is massive in the US. Do you know how many medical bankruptcies there are in this country? 0, because we have guaranteed healthcare. And I think you're absolutely right. I mean, this story has kind of created a big sort of push to class consciousness, because you're seeing people across the political spectrum saying, yeah, this is good, or we don't care. And I think that's really important, because people are going to wake up to the fact that it's not just healthcare, by the way. It's this class of people, whether it's CEOs doing the bidding of billionaires or billionaires themselves, they're screwing you over. And what this person did is also prove that it was effective, because the Blue Shields company have reversed their policy on anesthesia, and CEOs are trying to hide their identities. Like, they're scared, and they should be scared. I'm not saying they should be scared because people should go and shoot them up, but they should be scared that the working class are rising, or let's hope the working class are rising.
Just to give the idea to anybody who's watching about like the power as well of the US healthcare and drug lobbies in America, there are rules in place. I can't remember if it's for Medicare or Medicaid or both. They're government plans for people who are either retired who get healthcare, or people who are disabled or poor. But the drug companies have managed to lobby the government so they're not allowed to negotiate drug prices.
Yes.
If a company says, oh, this is the price of the drug, there is a law in place that says the government cannot negotiate that price. It's absolutely insane. And we have drugs in this country where they've come over here, the drug companies have said, we want to sell you this drug. There was one a few years ago for, oh God, I've forgotten the name of that health condition with your lungs. Sorry, cystic fibrosis. And they wanted to sell this drug to the NHS for about £200,000 per year per patient. And obviously this drug is life-changing. It's great. But then it's just no, and managed to negotiate them down to about half of that price. They don't get that option in the US. They say it's 200 grand per person. It's 200 grand. But then on top of that, that's just the price from the drug company. That drug has to then go through the hospital, which they have to make a profit from. And then it has to go through the insurance company, and they have to make a profit off of it. And the last time I checked the data, it was about, in the UK, we spend about £3,000 to £4,000 per year on average on healthcare per person. And in the US, it's about up to about $15,000. So in around £12,000 to £13,000.
I also love as well that people say, well, it's the free market. We love the free market. Well, this is an example. There's no free market here, because there's a law to say that the government cannot be sort of in competition with these private companies. Because they know, and the reason why is because they know the government is always the best in the market. They're always going to be the cheapest, and private companies can never compete with that, because there's a profit motive there. So they have to like maintain this market. It's all a lot of bullshit, and the worry is it's coming over here. Like, people, as I said earlier, people are like, oh, thank God for our NHS. It's happening now though. it's going to be slow, but we've got these greedy bastards with their hands on our NHS contracts, and all that's going to do is inflate the price because we need to pay shareholders their profits. And those that look to right-wing parties, and I know every party is complicit in this, the Labour Party loves their private health insurance. I'm looking at you, Wes Streeting, by the way. But people like Reform, they love privatisation of healthcare. They don't even want universal healthcare. These are the people they're in bed with. So if you support Reform, long-term, their goal will be to get rid of the NHS, and we're going to move to a US-style system. And if you want to protect our CEOs, well, maybe we should protect universal healthcare so people don't get gunned down.
Yeah, there's also, it's obviously with the NHS thing on the Reform, I'm still surprised that that wasn't a bigger attack on Reform when they were during the election time. And I think as well, what I'm scared of perhaps for the next election is that Reform are still going to go on this NHS privatization thing. They wouldn't have done it before if they're not going to do it again. Obviously, they are going to try and push this system and sell it as the the France system, which works so well. The Americans relied, the Democrats relied way too much on hoping that just like the abortion issue would get them into power. Like, oh, he's going to take away your abortion rights. Like, vote for me. And I feel like maybe the Labour Party might rely too much on the idea that because we love the NHS so much that people can't possibly vote Reform in because what they want to do to the NHS. But at the same time, we can't rest on those laurels because...
But I mean, but Labour also can't, and that's what they didn't attack them in the general election. They can't, because they can't turn around and say, well, you can't trust the NHS with Reform. They love their privatisation. Meanwhile, Wes Streeting saying, open up the floodgates to privatisation. And Labour are also bought off by billionaires. So they can't attack them on that, which is kind of the same as the Democratic Party. I mean, I would have thought maybe abortion was enough to maybe sway people to vote for Trump, for women that is, even though the majority of white women vote for Trump. But to go on these issues alone isn't enough. And that is what worries me. But I think Labour, they love their privatisation. So they're gonna increase it and potentially in the future Reform get in government and just finish it off.
Yeah, and on top of that, like there is no system that makes sense that's private where more profit doesn't come into it, right? Obviously, the NHS, the companies that we use, the private companies, the drug companies, obviously they still make a profit off of us, but it's capped in so many ways. It's negotiated in so many ways. Everything is regulated in certain ways, which tries to keep the prices down. Obviously, there's things that get in the way, and we're ripped off in so many ways. But under a private system, look at America again. The idea of the free market will keep things cheap. It's a joke. And it's ridiculous. And if anybody thinks that moving away from the current model that we've got would make things any better, maybe it will make it better for people who've got money, but it won't make it better for anybody else.
I mean, there's a famous Bernie Sanders quote in the 2016 Democratic primary. He says, I want healthcare that's rationed on your need, not on the size of your wallet. So what, you have to wait a couple of days for a hip replacement, but it's free. And I noticed, I watched a clip today that Rima Ibrahim from the IEA was platformed on the TV again saying, well, privatisation is actually good. And you're going to see figures like her and other people. By the way, Rima Ibrahim, she is funded by her job is the IEA. She literally gets paid to spread propaganda because the IEA is a libertarian think tank, which they don't disclose their donations, by the way, but we kind of know they're funded by private health insurers and lobby industries. She's getting paid to push the privatization agenda. Do not fall for it. They want your money. They want our money, and they want you to die for it. My producer is in my ear because we have to get onto our final story. So let's move on. Amnesty International has finally declared that Israel is committing a genocide. Amnesty International has accused Israel of committing genocide against Palestinians during its war against Hamas in Gaza. The human rights group said Israel sought to deliberately destroy Palestinians by launching deadly attacks, demolishing vital infrastructure, and preventing the delivery of food, medicine, and other aid. It said such actions met the legal threshold for the crime of genocide. It is the first time it has made such a determination during an active armed conflict. In a report, Amnesty said Israel's actions could not be justified by Hamas's attack into Israel on the 7th of October last year, which ignited the war, or on the presence of militants in civilian areas. Amnesty said the US and other Israeli allies could be complicit in genocide and called on them to halt arms shipments. Our damning findings must serve as a wake-up call to the international community. This is genocide. It must stop now. Agnes Callamard, Amnesty's International Secretary General, said in the report. Now, clearly, this is a pretty obvious statement for all of us, and this has been way overdue, even though Amnesty they've called out Israel consistently. Now, despite the clear genocide, despite the ICC arrest warrants and multiple human rights organisations, including Amnesty, calling out Israeli war crimes, we still have the media trying to push back. This is a clip of Agnes Kalamar, the head of Amnesty, responding to Sky News, where they ask, how could this be a genocide if Israel is allowing aid to get through to Palestine?
Your mind that the Israeli government and Israeli leaders genuinely want to wipe out the Palestinians of Gaza. That is their clear intent, and that's what they're doing. Because if that's the case, why are they calling ahead buildings that they're going to strike by the air to warn people to get out? Why are they letting in aid? Albeit imperfectly, but they are letting aid in, and they have been in hundreds of trucks, they would say. That's not really compatible, surely, with a government trying to wipe out an entire race, is it?
Absolutely not true. It's absolutely not true. First of all, our investigation has shown that in the 15 cases that we have thoroughly investigated, it's only the tip of the iceberg. We have many more evidence to it. But in those 15 cases, only in one case were people told that there was gonna be an attack. So it is not at all the norm for Israeli to warn people, and warnings are not amounting to taking necessary precaution. In fact, most of those warnings have been known to create chaos, to create panic. They happen in the middle of the night, which is the other thing that is characteristic of this military operation. The use of huge bombs when it is not necessary in an immensely populated area. The use of such weapon is meant to inflict the greatest number of casualties. They are used at night when people are asleep. There is no military necessity there when there are no Hamas fighters located, and they are not everywhere, sorry. So,
right.
You're talking about humanitarian aid. The little piecemeal approach to the provision of humanitarian assistance is shameful. You just need to look at the result on the ground. People have no food.
Now, on the same show, former member of the Labour right, now turned Israel spokesperson and a complete crackpot, I may add, David Menzer, said this is a classic case of anti-Semitism.
Gave his reaction to the report on Sky News. Have a listen.
This is a classic example of anti-Semitism. It is Holocaust inversion. The crimes committed against my people, Israel, are now, in turn, being accused of this same crime. The reality is that this genocide claim just completely fails to address Hamas's genocidal rhetoric. You know, their leaders call for the eradication of Jews, the wiping of my country off the face of the earth. This report's supposed to be impartial. It's ridiculous.
So that's the ICC, ICJ, B'Tselem, and newspapers calling this out, and now Amnesty, but they're all anti-Semitic. Lewis, what's going on? Every human rights organisation that's called out Israel hates Jewish people.
I wonder if the former defense minister of the Likud party, who said just a few days ago that what Israel is doing is ethnic cleansing, that's the former defense minister, the guy who was in charge of the military in Israel about 10 years ago.
So he's anti-Semitic as well, then?
He's got to be, hasn't he? And about an hour ago or two as well, an Israeli historian who works at I think it's Tel Aviv University, and has also worked at Princeton, also came out with the claim that he believes in his personal opinion, his professional opinion, though, however, that it's also genocide. He used the word genocide. But yeah, everyone's just anti-Semitic. The funniest thing about all of this is, as you know, I've often said this, I read Israeli media every day. I want to see what the vibes are. I want to see what stories are coming out. So as I said at the beginning of the show, I was awake till 4 o'clock this morning, and I got a notification to say that the new version of the Jerusalem Post came out. And on the front of the newspaper today, they've got two things. The first thing is, NGO Monitor says that basically Amnesty is just full of shit. NGO Monitor is an Israeli-funded NGO, which was founded by a guy who has worked for Benjamin Netanyahu, who's worked for the Israel Foreign Ministry, and they don't disclose where they get their funding from, but obviously they disguise it as a impartial NGO. It is not. And then just above that, it was the claim that Amnesty Israel rejects Amnesty International's report and saying it's not a genocide. If you actually look to what they say we reject the claim that it doesn't meet the definition of genocide, but we do think it meets the definition of ethnic cleansing and war crimes. But again, it's distorting the truth. It's distorting reality. And that's what, it's just Israel all over. It's what they do everywhere. I went on to Ynet, which is the most popular Israeli media outlet, and they reported on the same story saying Amnesty Israel rejects this claim. They didn't even bother to mention that Amnesty Israel says it's ethnic cleansing. Because they don't report on these things at all, because they favor the government. They like what they do, and they're supporting it, and they're complicit. But one thing that is very interesting is with Amnesty International is that Keir Starmer has worked for them on multiple occasions. A guy called Xander Phillips from the National Scot today published an article just a few hours ago explaining how Keir Starmer worked for them and helped write a book in 1988 referencing how much he loves working with Amnesty International. He represented Amnesty International in a case in 2006. He's done a book launch with them in 2014, and he was on a panel for them in 2016. So he clearly thinks they're credible. So I'm wondering what his response is going to be to this, because it's been over 24 hours, verging on a day and a half now, and we haven't had a response from the government. Now, am I being too optimistic to say that maybe between him and Richard Hermer, the Attorney General, who they were both human rights lawyers in the 90s together, that maybe, just maybe, the fact that they haven't responded when other countries like Germany have responded and said they're rejecting the claims, they could have come out immediately and said, we're rejecting them too, but they haven't. Am I allowed to be slightly optimistic, Curtis? Am I being naive that maybe they could be getting ready to take some action?
I mean, I was going to ask you, because Amnesty are usually quite cautious about labelling things as genocide, which is probably why it's taken so long. But the report is very extensive. So for them to come out and say this, that does, I guess, seem quite significant. Maybe that's played a role into the government. But then at the same time, I'm thinking, does that even matter? Because we've had 14 months of a genocide live streamed and it's changed nothing. It is worth noting that they've kept silent. Part of it is possibly because Keir Starmer's embarrassed, because he used to work for Amnesty, but he also then said in the 90s, when Blair was in government, he said that the Labour Party or the Labour government should stop arms sales to Israel. He said that in the 90s, and now obviously he's literally doing it himself. Part of that is embarrassment, or do you think it's bigger than that?
Well, I really, really don't know. Obviously, we'll hopefully find out soon. The fact that we still haven't had a response, that no journalists, as far as I know, have tried to ask the question. We've had some good prominent journalists tweet this out, but others not even talking about it. I'm a bit frustrated, but as we continue to be with the media, there are some people who've covered this story and continue to cover this story well in the media, but overall they've still failed massively. But, I listen to a lot of podcasts from to less mainstream, and BBC Newscast still hasn't mentioned it. News Agents, the most popular political podcast in the UK right now, still hasn't mentioned it.
I think it was mentioned on the BBC website. It was mentioned on the BBC website, then deleted, I think.
Really? Didn't see that.
So they haven't reported on it now, and that's the website as well, because broadcast media we know is incredibly biased.
Victoria Derbyshire was one of the first people to tweet it out.
Say that again, sorry.
Victoria Derbyshire was one of the first people to tweet it out and actually spread some decent awareness about this.
Victoria Derbyshire is one of the few half decent people in the BBC. But we know what we're going to get with the broadcast media on BBC. Sometimes the website is a little bit better, but there's nothing.
Yeah, and again, it's just absolutely shameful because you know what? Yeah, the report came out when Keir Starmer did his claims. I didn't expect anybody to ask him while he was there about that. That's fine, but there's been obviously opportunities since then. He's constantly surrounded by the media, and they still haven't come forward with a statement. And I still haven't seen any journalists ask him about this because I want to know what they think about it. But again, with the Amnesty International thing, I really want somebody to ask him a question as well, not just like, "What do you think of the report?" But by the way, you've worked for them on multiple occasions. You've praised them. You've referenced
do you
them.
think the media are going to be that inquisitive?
Well,
Do you
no.
really think they're going to do that? I mean,
It can
I
be
think they
helpful.
can. I can see them doing a blanket like, "Oh, did you see this report? What do you say?" But do you
Yeah.
really think they're going to go at Starmer that much and say, "By the way, you work for Amnesty. You were calling on the Labour government to withdraw arms to Israel. What do you say now?" It's like, would the media do that?
Yeah, and obviously, well, the position that they're in as well, just to side off this, obviously at the moment is the US. They're in between administrations. We know that the UK just absolutely gets on its knees for whichever administration's in power. It doesn't really matter at all, does it? And we know just from a couple of weeks ago, just in case anybody missed this story, is that when they suspended the 29 licenses out of about 350, they were put into a red category that these licenses could potentially be contributing towards war crimes and crimes against humanity. But we found out, I think it was last week in court filings, that there was actually 5 more that they identified as the red. And they allowed them to go ahead because they were for the F-35s, and the court documents specifically showed that the government was scared of what the US might think if they suspended the parts to the F-35s.
I mean, they made a whole song and dance, didn't they, saying we're suspending arms sales to Israel.
Yeah.
It's like, well, 97% or 93% were kept in there. It's meaningless.
And we've got David Lammy last week, I think it was, saying there are no journalists in Gaza. They don't care.
It's insane. Absolutely insane. I mean, the guy is a monster.
Yeah, like
Shameful.
Basan just won an Emmy for her documentary. Oh, there's no journalist in Gaza. 200, in fact, have been killed so far. 200, David Lammy. But again, this is what I mean. I jump up and down. There's a tiny part of me, it's 2%, which is hoping that maybe this Amnesty report pushes them to do something. But at the same time, I've immediately gone back to, no, nothing's going to change.
Okay, well, we're a little bit over time, so that is all we have time for. I want to thank everyone who tuned in. And of course, I want to thank Lewis for your great insights. Remember, if you haven't liked the stream already, then please do. And if you're not subscribed, then make sure you do that too. Hit the notification bell. And if you come back after live and drop a comment, that actually really helps the algorithm. So we'd appreciate that. So in 5 minutes time, just come back and say, we love you or we hate you, whatever. That's what we want. Now, if you want to see Turn Left continue to grow, then make sure you share this video online, tell your friends and family about us. And again, if you're not subscribed, make sure you do. Now, there are currently only a handful of us working voluntarily, and we want to be in a position where we are paid for our work. And one day this becomes our full-time jobs. That means we can have better equipment, a proper studio, and more ambitious content. We've done a few of those already. We've done interviews with the big guys, or a couple of the big guys anyway. We've done Vox Pops. But why aren't we doing this every week? Why don't we get big interviews every week? It takes money and time. So you can help. And one day we can have a studio so we can really build a socialist media alternative. You can support us financially by going to turnleftmedia.co.uk/support to donate. And you can follow us on Blue Sky. Again, our handle is simply @turnleftmedia.co.uk. I want to thank everyone for watching. It has been a pleasure. Sorry it's been so long. It won't happen again. And I'll see you next time.
Media. Support social justice that's there on social media. Thank you. Turn left.